in memory of our late departed Queen, who death was announced on Thursday. Hope you'll join me in standing for 1 minute silence, I reckon. Thank you. Long live the King.
Long live the King.
To get on with business, have we any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair. We have Councillors Cosby, Bucking, Minshall and Messent.
Thank you. Have we got any declarations of interest from members on items on the agenda? Can't see any, thank you for that. Item 3 is to consider the co-option of Councillor Murray to the committee. Have I got a proposer for that?
I'll move.
Dennis, you're proposing. I've got a seconder. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Confirm the minutes of the Finance and Governance meeting. Then we've got any problems with the minutes in terms of accuracy? Is anybody willing to propose it? Thank you, Emma. Anybody willing to second? Dennis, thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. Public participation, a period of 15 minutes for the public to ask questions and submit comments. I can't see any members of the public. Have we had anybody submit any questions?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Item 6, to review the year-to-date financial position for Crewe Town Council. Are you going to lead us on this, Pete?
Sure. The spend profile meets expectations. There are no challenging aspects as yet. So I would expect to see the utility costs associated with accommodation to challenge the budgeted figure. But at the bottom line, I think we'll have savings elsewhere to mitigate that.
Right, thank you. So, Emma?
I'm just wondering about costs associated with the death of the Queen. I mean, activities that we're involved in, so the service and things, whether that's.
Yeah.
I presume it's all it's accounted for.
It's always accounted for, Councillor. Yeah, there's no question about that. It's we accessing that through the civic budget. Our mayors don't tend to draw on that an awful lot, and that civic budget's covering costs associated with any events we're putting forward. They are being put forward at relatively low cost because lots of volunteer help. Welcome.
Thank you. Does anybody else any other questions? No. So we have to say we've reviewed that and noted progress. Thank you. To note and recommend to Council approval of payments 1st of June to 31st of August to the value of £113,495.96, and that's on page 11 of your agenda pack. Anybody, any comments or questions? Dennis?
We seem to pay a lot of money out of Ansett. I'm not knocking it or anything, I'm just wondering why.
Well, we have a number of service level agreements with them, including the Ranger service is carried out through them. They have recently carried out some works on allotments for us where issues have arisen. And equally, they take our bins away on contract.
Oh, right. A lot of money.
Well, yeah, I mean, I
Yes,
presume how much, the ranges are quite expensive, aren't they, because it's their salaries and things, is it?
Yeah, salaries, cost of the vehicles, running the vehicles, and some consumables in there, clothing, things like that. So yeah, the ranges are obviously £170,000 for the year. So it's, you're looking at 2 quarters worth of that, or 1/2, whichever way you want.
I'll take it we're getting value for money then.
We have a good team of rangers who are working very hard and linking directly with us, not Ansett. It's just a mechanism whereby we have nowhere to house rangers. We don't have a yard for them, or safe van storage, or a tipping area for the waste they pick up. So we have to work with our partner Ansett to make that happen at this stage.
Thank you. Does anybody else any other questions about payments? No? That's just to note, so if we move on.
Sorry, it's not, needs recommended to council.
Oh, sorry. So is anybody willing to propose that this is recommended to council? Emma, anybody want to second? Dennis? All those in favour? Thank you. Item 8, which is to review the following governance documents as part of the annual governance review. Child Protection of Vulnerable Persons Safeguarding Policy, which is page 15.
There are no proposed amendments to it. It comes from a advised format, and so realistically, I think it's a bit detailed. It's the only one this time around. And we've also, by the way, caught ourselves on governance review anyway, so it shouldn't be so fully in the meeting in the future. So on that, it's just there as it has been reviewed. If you're happy for it to have been reviewed, it's, I'm not recommending change.
So anybody, any comments, questions? Just can see people going through, so give them a minute. It's like being at the seaside.
Can I have an aspirin?
No.
Right, so is anybody willing to propose that we accept this new or reviewed policy? Emma, anybody willing to second? Dennis? All those in favour? Thank you. Item 9, to receive a member audit.
Yeah, it's practice. We have different tiers of audit, quite rightly, and that can be process or accounting or policy or whatever it's going to course. We have at the highest level the government appointed external auditor, which is towards the end of this agenda anyway. And then the next one we have an internal independent auditor who is an appointed professional from another organisation, and they do 2 audits a year on us. And equally have another tier of audit, which is where elected members, one of yourselves or any of yourselves, frankly, I don't mind, comes in and has a look over what's going on and checks that it's as would be expected. And this latest one was done by Councillor Cosby, who's done the last 2, and it's put towards you. I don't think there are any issues highlighted, and that's that's all the information I've got for you.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions on that? No, I think it's fairly self-explanatory. So, we're just accepting that, aren't we? And noting that it's been done. Right, item 10, which relates to office accommodation and the consideration of a new window to increase office space capacity. So Pete, do you want to lead us on this?
Yeah, there is an office occupied at the minute upstairs that doesn't have a window or any natural light because it's blocked in part way along. We have upstairs is at capacity, it's quite full up there. There's 3 people in each end office where the windows are and 1 person in the middle office where the windows aren't. It's suggested that a window in there is an option, and that would also mean we could move people around to spread them out a bit more effectively and probably harmoniously as well. It's there as an option. I'm not fixed on this needs to go ahead now. Then, when I first received this quote, I misread it and misinformed the councillor John Rhodes, because the top line of the quote is 1,500 quid, and the bottom line of the quote is £5,000. So actually, the potential cost, if you were minded to do it, is £6,930 to knock a hole in the wall, all the associated drawings, technical specification, building regs, drawings and that sort of thing, some scaffold, and the completion of works would be £6,930. So a bit more than I first informed Councillor John Rhodes in error.
And also the thing is that it's talking about if costs go up and things, isn't it? They're clarifying their position, obviously, the current position.
Yeah, well, it wasn't the quote wasn't actually too long ago, and I have confirmed with them that this won't be made a decision until whether it goes ahead or not. It won't be made a decision until tonight anyway. They clarified there was no increase expected. That.
Yeah. But if we left it longer.
It was, yeah, the price. Yeah. So I just want to be careful. I don't want you to think that you must approve this. It's has a positive impact in the operation of the office, but equally, it's close on £7,000. So I don't want it to feel like you're put in a situation that you don't feel comfortable with.
John?
Yeah, I'll accept the error that you made, and the reason why I was discussing it with Pete, because I came up for a meeting with Pete reference to a planning meeting. I met with Pete in that office, and it was in that hot spell, and I just felt that, and I have said it to him before, that you really need a window in the wall. I just don't think it's fit for purpose. And the fact we have taken some extra staff on, I think you could be very creative. And yeah, you did say the bottom line rather than the top line, but even so, I think for, I said it at the last meeting, we have a duty of care. And that duty of care means that the health and safety of our employees. And I think that window would enhance that, and it would enable us to move the offices around a bit and spread it out, because at the moment it tended to not be all there at the same time, and that's probably, you know, we can say that they all could be and quite safe with it. So I would recommend that we do proceed with the work to get a window. I just think it would be conducive.
Anybody else, any other comments?
I don't think we've got a choice. It's just something that it should have been done years ago, and as far as I'm concerned, it'll be money well spent.
Yeah,
I agree. Obviously, the fact it's upstairs, then obviously it's the scaffolding costs, that's quite expensive, so it does seem a reasonable price. And again, it's the comfort and well-being of our workforce, and I think that's imperative.
Yeah.
And of course, to say a little bit more, of course, if when we would move on, I would think a window there would enhance the the cost and
The value.
the selling date of the value of the property. So I think we're adding value actually.
Thank you. Anybody else got any other comments? Is anybody willing to make a proposal? Kevin?
Yeah.
So you're proposing, Kevin, that we
Yes.
go ahead with this installation of the window. Is anybody willing to second that? Emma, thank you. It's proposed and seconded, all those in favour? Right, moving on to item number 11. Consider the development of the template documents and page 31 of your agenda pack.
Yeah. The town council is still a parish council, but is a parish council of some. And the procurement processes we have to go through can be quite complex, and not one of us is. So the regulations associated with public spending, quite rightly, are very stringent and also regularly updated. We now quite often go into the realms of having to use the process, which is quite complex as well. And the advertising of those procurement processes takes a lot of time to do. Suggestion, and that's what it is. We suggest that we get our own pack of templates and a handbook to help us through the process of procurement to ensure we're compliant with all the regulations, and equally we can be confident in the ways we are doing it and consistent as well. Now then, we went to look for some quotes, non-committal at all, just to have an understanding of the costs. There are two quotes.
You don't worry about that, you just look at the net figure.
I know that, I'm just guessing.
And anybody else?
Procurement, so we can procure to low levels without detailed documentation, but once you get past £1,000 into £3,000, and above £3,000, you then need contracts in place under our standing orders, quite rightly. And then above the £25,000, you need to do a full procurement on a public open tender basis on the government website, and over £50,000 onwards, it makes further differences. So, for example, if we were to procure in 2023 for a 3-year provision of Christmas lights, which is a significant amount of money, it would be effectively a contract over 3 years worth of £150,000. We would have to procure that very, very carefully, because once we appoint contractor A, B, or C, the non-appointed contractors can then legally challenge it, and if we've not done it correctly, it could cost an awful lot of money. And take us a lot of time to have the right people in place. And there are other things we do like that we would seek to ensure we had security of contract for 3 or 5 years, and that way we're moving to an area where you're working with some very complex situations. I'll be honest, I can't get my head around all the time as we change. So having these templates would make us be more assured of our processes.
You're saying that they change?
Yeah.
So if we get this toolkit or whatever, and then things change, what happens then?
We would have to, on an annual basis, just seek a little advice on what is the updates on procurement contracts.
So we'd be going back to the.
Yeah, but none of this level
No,
at all.
No, but there would still be a cost.
There will be a cost. There'll be a subscription cost in the low hundreds.
Yeah, okay.
And you're saying that you don't see the difference between the 13 and the other one?
Yes, that's correct. That's exactly what I'm saying.
And I'll propose we go with the 13,000, put that forward.
Thank you, Dennis. Has anybody got any more questions before we go to the
I just
vote?
need to just search it a little bit more. So at the present, and let's use the lights as an example. In the past, I mean, you wouldn't be here then, but in the past, the town clerk would have looked at that, and he would have, or she would have done that.
Yeah, which would still
And
be the
that,
case.
if we then brought that down in time and money,
I'll give you a direct example very recently. We procured and very carefully for the delivery of the parts leading to a business improvement district, a bid. Yep. And that's a £50,000 contract, just short of. So we had to procure through the Government Gateway contract finder process, which is an extremely lengthy process, and we had to cross-reference every detail with every potential contract outcome, and it took Lindsay, who was doing it, 2 weeks to work through that.
so when we then put the money in and work that out, that's quite costly.
Yeah,
Time and effort.
and that's going to be repeated over and over again.
And then we lose what Heather Lindsay would have been doing.
And a little bit of support from me, and Lindsay must take all the credit, but it does take a bit of time of second checking it and making sure that we both understand which way it's going. And so I would say there was easily 2 weeks work in getting that tender out.
And the amount of tendering we do,
It's quite a lot, it's increasing. So in the coming year, we're going to do the Christmas lights, so that's a big one. Through, I could do one down. We're going to have to, there's everything to do with lumen, has to be procured. Anything to do with the events generally will have to be procured different levels, but some of those are well over the £10,000 to £20,000 mark.
Community plan's got some.
Yeah, community plan, there's lower level procurement there, but the procurement of commissioning local services from the third sector has to be carried out. Operations improvements, the floral scheme will have to be procured again, which is £35,000 a year as a budget. We've got play area improvement schemes, which has a budget annually of £100,000. At the minute, we are fixed with going with Answer, but I truly believe there's opportunity for savings there and a more variety of options if we were to procure outside of Answer, and I have done in the past elsewhere. We may well be going forward with large-scale funding associated with heritage. There's public realm works that are taking forward. and various regeneration projects. Just on a quick sketch through there, and that's in next year's draft budget.
So clearly, if we went for the template, there would still be some time against that, but they would, over a period of time, it would in effect pay for itself.
I truly believe it will, yeah, and also that template will stand for a number of years, although it may be updated with subscription, but it will stand for a number of years, and over those years will very easily pay for itself. Now, I haven't done a calculation on that, and I can go away and try and give you a comparative cost of life.
It's just I think we should just delve in a little bit, because I think it's what you're recommending is the 50,000, and I'm happy to support that. I just needed to hear what you do at present, how much, and whether to say, because we've got to be mindful of the cost of the council.
Entirely agree. If you need more information, I'll go away and try and find it.
The other thing, obviously, in Hudson's one, it's talking about the other costs involved is their travel and where I didn't actually saw where they're travelling from, and whether that side of things will how.
A significant amount can be done remotely.
Yeah.
And before anything was put in place, I would always have a fixed cost, because it's only appropriate.
Yeah.
Well, Dennis has proposed the Hudson one, which is 13,000. Is anyone willing to second that?
It's 15,000.
It's 13,000 plus there is.
Yeah, but we don't pay for that.
We don't pay for that. There is.
Plus costs.
There is a consideration of giving it an upper limit of 15,000, subject to any unknowns. But that's currently the quote we have at 13,000.
Plus expensive.
Yeah.
So you're willing to second that?
Yes.
So it's been proposed and second that we have a maximum budget of £15,000 to cover any extra costs. But the actual bid that we're looking at is £13,000. So all those in favour? Thank you. To consider the draft refreshed of the Crewe Town Council corporate strategy for 2020 to 2024. This is on page 69.
Have adopted a strategy in early 2020, and that strategy is going forward to 2024, and that will coincide with an established administration following the local elections next year. That said, it's always, I believe, wise to revisit and refresh, and gone back to the corporate strategy and offered you a slightly refreshed version, taking into consideration progress towards the different bits of work, including, for example, the brand values are now included throughout, which were adopted some time ago. Equally, it takes consideration the work towards, for example, heritage. The council's heritage office now working very closely with the Heritage Centre, and they are seeking more and more support and involvement from us, which is very positive to drive them on. And they're in a stronger position because of it. There is, the things haven't changed. I haven't sought to make massive amendments to this because members were involved in developing it. It's just sought to be refreshed and updated to demonstrate some of the resolution, or all the resolutions hopefully, that have taken place in the interim. That's where we're at. It's not seeking a whole U-turn or change direction. It's just trying to update it all. It's also giving an update on all the adopted strategies and some of the surrounding governance associated with that.
That's for the next one. Yeah. That's the last page you've got there.
I'll be honest, it's not dead exciting. It is literally a refresh of what was already there.
And we finish on page It finishes on page,
Numbers were out.
We've run out of numbers on the pages.
Finish on the page that Christchurch is on.
that's the end of the document.
Don't know what's happened to the page numbers, I'm sorry. It will be expected that prior to 2024, in the first year of the current administration, that we would go to look at how we develop a new corporate strategy. It might well reflect already what's already in there, but it would be right to take forward a new corporate strategy and associated consultation.
Has anybody got any comments, questions? I think some of the pictures are quite good. Forgotten we'd had those sorts of things.
Well, to be fair, most of the refresh is just the graphics.
Don't realise what effect COVID had, do you, until you look at these things that, you know, we had in the town.
Yeah.
Is anybody willing to propose that we accept this new corporate draft strategy, this new corporate strategy
Recommendation to council.
for recommendation to council? Emma will. Is anybody willing to second? Dennis? Can still see people writing. All those in favour? Thank you. So we move on to another weighted document, which is the medium-term financial plan, which is on page 85, and it's after the picture of the Christchurch.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have no idea what else they were on there. At least each item in this report is numbered, very detailed, indexed. So, on this one, the medium-term financial plan is part of our financial security, and it's there to demonstrate that thought is put into how we progress with finances and how they're targeted and what they work towards, and linked into your corporate strategy. This has got full track changes through it. There have been some grammatical changes to when I wrote it the first time. I was probably in a rush. And there have been some updates that the team thinks be taken out. Now, it does reflect, for example, the changes in the economy now, and it does reflect, for example, that we've moved beyond COVID times, and we're working post-COVID times. Similarly to the corporate strategy, some of it has remained unchanged, but it does come to the financial assumptions and the impact of any increase in operational costs and inflation, that sort of thing, that we come to a final page of section 8, budget forecasting, indicating on this basis that we always try and minimise any impact on the precepts, and try and, through this medium-term financial plan, that's the aim of it. And it identifies the budget lines and the aims for those levels of funding, and seeks to keep the potential impact on the precept at the 3% mark. It may be as much as 3.5%, depending on some fluctuations. So realistically, with all the preamble, it's more updating than intrinsically changing it. But the section 8 is about the impact in the end on the bottom line and how that might affect people. And as I say, my draft this indicates that it should be in the region of 3, maybe 3.5% for the current financial year.
Technically means in effect we've got to pare things back.
It does, yes, because it won't reflect inflation. That said, there are in the budget drafting process that you're also doing, there are things that we could be meaner on, and that's the nature of the times we're in. It would be hard, I think, to seek to transfer the cost increases of ourselves onto residents who are also having that compounded. So I think whilst we're in a strong financial position because in the past couple of years you've taken shrewd decisions to maintain a steady and restrained approach to finances, and that means that although it will be hard for some of the committees to find some savings, they can be done without significantly impacting on the end service. So I'm not suggesting any cutbacks to main services like ranges or Christmas lights or anything like that, but it would seek to just to restrain any growth in spend, shall we say, to make sure we get there. If members are minded that's an appropriate figure, I'm just suggesting that figure, not forced to accept it.
Thanks, Pete. Has anybody got any questions?
Dennis?
Dennis?
I need to say that I totally agree that the people that we represent at the moment are having a really hard time. And anything that we can do to lighten that burden on them, then I'm totally in favour of.
Of course, we've
Yes,
had some significant increases on salaries, simply not out of our making, but it's, you know, the JNC did the negotiation, and that's what they recommended. We have to find it. We don't get any extra finance from government or the council. We have to find that, and if we don't, then we have to take decisions.
At this time, the NJC is indicating its proposal would have something off the top of my head, I can't find this correctly, right? Something like it'll have an 8% overall impact on cost of employment. And so that obviously impacts on everything else down the line. So I am recommending means by which we absorb the greater impact of that as much as possible and don't pass it on to us.
We've also got the cost increase of fuel costs.
Yeah.
Which again, no, we're not going to get any assistance with. And whatever rise there is in business rates.
Because we have quite such a small space, we don't pay business rates.
But we will have increasing costs, won't we?
We do have increasing costs, fuel, utilities, they're all insurance costs are also rocketing. Claims are costing more, so the insurance costs more. So yeah, costs are definitely up, and every business that supplies us, the costs will have to go as well.
I mean, from personally, I believe that this year it's key that when we go through the budget process, that the committees look to reduce. It's an imperative. It's an imperative. If that means we have to trim a few £1,000s off the Christmas, then we should do so. I really believe we should make an effort as a council to reduce where possible. Now, I understand that we can't get it down. It would be very difficult to not make an increase. But I do think we should really drill down. Because, you know, where the assumptions are made here, that inflation did stand at 0.8 in December 2020, well, assure eggs are eggs in December 22, it's going to be about 11%, if not more. So, you know, we have to be mindful of that. So, whilst we'll make a decision at the right time, I just think at this stage we should say to all committee chairs, when you go through it, please try and make some savings. Because I think I'd rather trim a little bit off something. Now I know that when you work it all out, it might not be good, but I think we should be trying to do that. And I welcome the assumptions because I think that's what we're based on. We can't. I mean, there's so many things outside of our, you know, that we can't control. But we have to look at it, you know, and say, well, I can support that, the changes and all. But I do think, and I would plead to all those councillors, really look at it. And I'm with Dennis because I know Dennis supports that most years. But whilst it's a small amount, it's important that we're seen and we're actively drilling down to reduce more than ever. So thank you.
Anybody else any comments? I can assure you that the two meetings I've attended in the last 2 weeks, certainly looked very closely at budgets and have not agreed any increase on the current year's budget. So in real terms, we will not be able to produce or do the same amount of things because everything we do will be more costly. So effectively, we will be cutting things that we give to people crew because the costs will have risen. Even if our budget stands still, the costs will have risen, so we'll be able to deliver less. So we need to recommend this to council. Is anybody willing to propose that we accept the medium-term financial plan and recommend it to council?
Yeah.
Dennis, anybody else willing to second? Emma, thank you. All those in favour? Thank you.
Can I just point out?
Yeah.
With version control, you've got 2023 in a couple of places.
I'm very ahead of the time, you see. Thank you very much for being great.
Thank you. Item 14 is to note the minutes of the Personnel Subcommittee. Has anybody any questions on this? Pete, have you got anything to say?
No, Chair, it's the Personnel Subcommittee sits under this committee, and as such went forward as per its process. There's nothing there. It's got a recommend updated employee handbook, which will go to council for ratification, and any aspects associated with reviewing jobs is progressing through that committee. That's pretty much it, really.
So we're only asked to note them, so has anybody got any objections to noting? No. So item 15, the completion of the Cheshire East Community Governance Review as it relates to Crewe Town Council, which is on page 119.
Yeah, Cheshire East took forward over a protracted period a community governance process to look at the various boundaries around the borough of the lowest tier of governance, which is the parish tier where we sit, and that conclusion has happened, and as is proper, I'm informing you of that. The impact on Crewe is negligible, realistically, and it effectively is associated with a small number of houses to the east of the south end, and to the west of Sydney Road, and then other than that, there's no other real impact.
Not what was suggested in the initial.
No, they returned to a position of accepting the current situation as their preferred position. So there's not an awful lot to note there. There's about 30 houses that might move into Crewe.
But we'll move into Crewe because it was passed.
Oh, they will, yes, sorry. Who knows? Minds can be changed.
Well, they can have a vote, can't they, to not give Crewe to Crewe?
Okay.
We had that when we were first set up, but like, so yeah. Does anybody any comments? No. So that's just to note that the review's been completed and we have a small number of houses coming in to the town of Crewe. If we can move on to the draft budget setting process, which is item 16 and on page 123.
I have shared with you, I think it was draft version 5 of the budget for 23-24, and I now also have for me draft version 6, which I updated recently. Now there are some positives. Well, there's one positive, I'll say, and that is that our reserve account, which is in the CCLA, it's a public sector deposit fund, that sits at just over £1 million in reserves, which is appropriate to our turnover. And it used to be, this is absolutely no exaggeration, 12 months ago, the monthly interest of that was at its lowest about £26. But But now, the monthly interest off that is, the most recent one I received was £1,900. So I have upped, quite understandably, the potential interest to receive from the CCLA. I've upped it to 24,000, which would be indicative of what we're now, so that would risk the interest rate going down now. But, so I've upped that now to 10,000, so that makes a nice positive change to the bottom line. In this version, reflective of Councillor John Rowe's comments, I'm going to challenge you as a committee to take forward John Rowe's comments associated with committees reducing their costs. And I've identified opportunities for that, although the committees can obviously not do that, which would get us to 3.5%. And equally, there is another positive. The Cleaner Crew Enforcement Officer we fund via Cheshire East. Because it was going to be underspent this year, we can transfer that into an earmark reserve and cut next year's bill by £14,200. And in the end, with some slight adjustments to a couple of committee budgets, we will get to a 3.5% level. I can take the detail through that with people involved. I'm happy to share that. But it'll be down to the committees to agree that. But my proposal to you, or suggestion to you, so I can't propose, is that you advise committee to direct committee, advise council to direct committees to aim to make cuts such that we get to at least a 3.5% increase. Sorry, at most 3.5% increase in precincts, and anything below that is an added win.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody got any comments? We could start as well. I've just seen the election costs by looking at exactly how much money we've got in, because that's some rolling.
Do you want me to tell you that number? In just 1 minute.
I mean, I'm not,
On my desk.
because you know that administration really comes under our committee, and some things you can't cut.
Yeah.
You know, you can't cut the janitorial service. But you know, there are things where we're building up a pot that we possibly could not get rid of, at least reduce.
Currently sits 35, well, very slightly over £35,000 in the earmark reserve for elections. There, come November, we know we're not going to have any by-elections, because you cannot have a by-election in 6 months of a local election. So we could suggest that in the first year of operation, it's unlikely to have many by-elections, and that 35,000 might cover that. It's up to you whether you want to.
Out of interest, we actually been charged for the
Yes.
we have been fully.
Yeah.
And what did that? How does that work out? Sort of.
The last one was under £10,000.
Yeah.
I think.
Because I know
about
budgets of
9,000.
10, don't we, for an
Yeah, it can be as much as 12. It does depend on the location
right.
and the amount of electors in that location.
Yeah.
But this one was £9,000. I was advised we weren't charged first, and then they changed the
Yes.
because it coincided, I think, with the Police and Crime Commission, so
Yeah.
advised me would be fine.
Decided to recoup the money.
Yeah, but so there is election costs, earmark reserve potential of, bearing in mind there's £5,000 in this year's budget, so that'll take us up to a £40,000 earmark
Yeah.
reserve. There is £5,000 in the draft budget for the next financial year, which could be chopped off.
Do we get, if the Cheshire East are holding an election, do we get charged?
No, if it's an all boring election, or
Yeah.
not a general election, but a general local election, then no, that's all absorbed by Cheshire East.
So we
So
could
it's
have,
literally, but it's by-elections that we're covering, and that's, you just don't know, do you?
No, casual vacancy, it's up to about £12,000 from the last one I heard, the
Yeah.
highest level.
But you just don't know how many you're gonna have in the.
but we've got
period.
£35,000 in
Yes.
a reserve, so
You'll have 40 by next year as well.
Yeah.
So we don't really need,
We don't need to put any more in.
No,
not if we're looking to make savings this year, no.
Mm.
We could look at that again next year, yes.
I'm
Dennis?
assuming that if we've got the election next year, yeah?
Yeah.
Of the borough, I'm assuming that everyone who stands is gonna do at least 12 months before. I know we can't say for sure, but we can
You
assume.
You can't because.
No, well,
No,
something
we
might
lost-
die.
we
know
lost
that. I
people.
might die, no one knows for sure, but I mean,
You're right, but at £40,000, I feel comfortable advising that seems like a reasonable figure to have an earmark reserve for to see you
Between
through the
3
year.
and 4 by-elections.
Exactly
isn't it?
right, I would agree.
yeah,
So I think
so we can knock £5,000.
that's a downward one straight away, that's great, takes the pressure off the other committees.
Well, the other committees will have to make their savings, but that's
Takes
something.
some pressure, yeah,
It takes some
sorry.
pressure.
Yeah,
The sinking fund.
Under accommodation,
Mm.
that's earmark reserve here, I'm just gonna take a minute, that's somewhere. That earmark reserve currently sits at £5,000. So that's about to be swallowed up with a new window.
Right, so you'll need that to pay for the window.
I think that's
Yeah, okay.
window, yeah.
What about the strategic allowance?
That's there to enable us to be, take opportunities of manage risks as they come. It might once have been called something else. And so it is a responsive fund rather than a planned fund. So you can use one I would look at, if you want to reduce it or get rid of it.
So that's one that we could look at when we've got the budgets from the other committees.
Yes. So
That's one we could look at.
in November, you've got an opportunity there as well. You see it has reduced from last year anyway, with the issues, so.
the community events programme gone from 29 to 64,500.
Yeah, now that was discussed at the Marketing Events Committee and that came down from what was proposed. Now, to be fair on the Marketing Events Committee, their bottom line was reduced from what I recall.
Yeah,
It has reduced and it's slightly higher, so there could be movement on that, and that would be for that committee, which you sit on,
Yes, I know, yeah,
to change.
yeah.
And the community plan found savings and actually now sits at a budgeted figure below it is this year, so they found savings and reduced their expenditure overall anyway. So we'll be looking, the largest committee is Operations Improvements Committee, and I think we'll be looking for proportionate reductions from each committee, and maybe the M&E committee and the O&I committee will be able to make
and
those savings.
if we're looking at play area improvements, we've done 2, haven't we? And the other pocket parks are in the,
Done the Lansdowne Road.
and we're in the
We're not
process
doing
of doing.
Franklin, yeah.
So,
But we were hoping to move that on and keep that
yeah,
momentum
but
going, weren't we?
yeah, so we won't be able
And I
to do
think-
that this
I
year.
think something like that, in a way,
Yeah.
should be a priority to keep.
I-
You know, that's
Yeah.
the
That's
decisions
giving,
we've got to
yeah.
make, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would agree, it's a principle of direct service delivery and provision of quality play equipment on a rolling basis to make it sustainable for the whole town. It's supposed to roll around the wards and therefore it's all reaching as many residents as possible. So I would agree with some to members inside of
It's, I mean, it's up to members of that committee to decide, isn't it? But, I mean, that you might be able to trim a little bit off that.
I have got some indicative suggestions for each committee. More and well, I'll be taking them forward.
How much have we saved at the moment for what we?
But you've just taken £5,000 off it.
Yeah.
And equally today, through a little bit of understanding, we've upped the income by £18,000. So we're working towards the right figure. the income being an earmark reserve underspent from this year and equally increased income on interest from CCI.
And I know the community plan that last night stayed at the 22-23 budget, didn't it? It didn't go to the increased budget.
Correct.
So we're looking, I think we'll manage it, won't we? We'll manage to make the
I think
saving.
there's a number of options,
Yeah.
opportunities to make sure we get to that point. I think it's right that the council is asked to give clear direction to committees of what the aim will be. And my personal recommendation is 3.5% or less.
I mean, I can't remember, seeing where it is now, that the utility increase, do you think you've allowed sufficient, or do you think that should be greater?
Oh, yeah, I'm about to go to market on the utilities, and I don't know is the answer. I was hoping to give that answer at the
Yeah.
next committee, because.
Because it's not very clear, is it, how business, I mean, I presume we're counted up as a business
Oh, yeah,
rather than consumers, household, so, you know, it's the households they seem to be protecting, and then they seem to be saying they're going to protect businesses for 6 months. So,
I'm
It's-
very worried that when I go to market, effectively, the £5,000 we are suggesting we take out of the election costs will be swallowed up in
Yeah.
that. But I won't know until next meeting, because I'm literally going to market this week.
yeah, so that's fine, just so.
Sorry.
Yeah, but I
No,
mean,
but that's what we've got to be aware
Yeah.
of, is there will be those factors that are actually, and again, it's similarly like we discussed with the salaries, that we have no control over, and we need to be realistic in the budget to have that sort of more realistic figure than that, I think the 4,000 is currently in there.
Yeah, and in this, which I think is very optimistic, and in this committee's control of the budget, there is, as the chair pointed out, the strategic allowance, which effectively can be partially or wholly exercised. Just restricts, you know, how responsive you can be in the coming year, but it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
We do have significant reserves, so we can always draw those.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, I'd like to have a budget where we don't set out intending to use reserves,
Yes.
but obviously we have that
got
if we
fallback.
need to.
Well, yeah, in the medium-term financial plan, I recommend you always, or I will always recommend to you a balanced budget. I'll never, well, not never, I will always endeavour not to put in front of you a deficit budget, because they are unsustainable and effectively impossible to manage, and it will only ever result in a disappointing significant increase in receipts at a later date. So providing a realistic and honest budget that does demonstrate there are increasing costs and does demonstrate there are changes is, although, you know, not as popular in terms of a nice big headline, it does give that financial assurance and stability of when we plan our finances, whereas a deficit budget, we could draw down £100,000 from reserves and give a budget of zero increase, but that would leave us in a deficit budget that the coming administration would have to solve, and then that would compound with inflation to be a significant number that then would impact on future years. So I wouldn't ever advise, it's your decision. I don't think I'd ever advise it unless it's extreme. So.
We did that as a council, was it 4 or 5 years, we didn't increase?
No, we didn't. Certainly the first 2 years, we didn't have any increase there.
It was, but at the end of the period of not having an increase, we had no choice, and the increase was far more than what we had wanted to do. I know that I had a rather loud discussion with some gentleman that was on the council at the time. I believe that we've always got to go have a little bit, even because if you don't, you end up having to make it a lot. And 3.5% to me, if we can get it to that, I personally, I'll be very happy.
Just about over, what is it, £2.88 or something a year. The Bambi property. I think you had it in your paper.
Yeah, it's just short of £3, yeah. rough maths.
per year for Band D. Well, most properties in Crewe are not Band D,
That's correct.
so we're
I
not.
know, sorry, it worked out 6p a week for me one year, but it was about 24% increase. And
Yeah.
because I was, sorry, I won't say I was doing that, I was rather vociferous. And somebody turned around and said to me, this is how much a year it is. And I went, yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, we are at the lower end of
Yeah.
the government spectrum, so any percentage increase is representative of a much smaller amount. So it
Yeah.
does bias the visibility of it, but it's also, we've got to be sensitive to people's
Yeah.
response to it, and I think that's a reasonable approach.
Yeah.
And you're right, even at that level, 3.5%, it's less than £3 a year Band D, and as the chair says, the majority of our properties are below Band D anyway, so even less than that a year. So it's not, we're not seeking to cause anyone any noticeable distress or harm.
No.
Yes, John.
Yeah, but I agree with you, but equally, what we're doing tonight is the correct way, is to look and drill down and see where, because as I say, at this particular time, it's important that we seem to be representing our residents in a manner that is responsible. And if I take 10 pence a week off, I want to be able to justify that I have to take the extra 10 pence. And I think the way that we're approaching budgets, and I've said this before, the last 2 years have been the correct way. We know where we are clearly, we know what we can, you know, we probably haven't in another year said, oh, let's take another few thousand out of that budget. Well, this year we have to. And I just think this is the correct way, and what we end up at we can stand up, and Dennis can stand up, and Kevin and yourself and say, and all councils and say, look, we've drilled down, we can't take any more out. We're mindful, some things are out of our control, but equally we are responsible employees. So I just think this is the best way, and you know, I could save us 120,000 in there. We could cancel Christmas. We could cancel the flowers, but let's be honest, we want some brightness in his lives as well. It's going to be an awful winter, awful. It doesn't matter where you live, whether you live in a Band A or a Band D, it's not going to be a good year. So, you know, people look on us, are we responsible? I believe we are, and this is the correct approach. Thank you.
So I'm happy to propose that we recommend to council, and we ask committees to make savings, as many savings as possible, to allow us to limit the precept to 3 or 3.5%, and that we seek as a council to absorb the staffing and other inflationary pressures which we are facing. Is anybody willing to second that? Thank you, Emma. All those in favour? Thank you. 2017 external audit.
We, as I said earlier, have an external audit, government appointed auditor, PKF Littlejohn, and nationally, we have not released many, if any, external audits as yet. I have chased them, and today as it happens, I received an email from them, which is a nice treat, that says that they expect to have our external audit with us this week. So I'm afraid I cannot share it with you. I've not known it arrived in September before. It should always arrive sometime in August, or even before occasionally. And so I can only apologise that I put it on the agenda because that's normal practice, and it's not here, so I can't share it with you. It will be, once received, it's published on the website, it's published on the notice board, and it's then shared with the council anyway as practice. But it should really come to FMG, and this time I can't share it.
Thank you very much. It's not your fault we haven't got it, is it?
No.
So there's no comments to be made on the external auditor's report. We've got only one more item, which is to note the proposed date of the next meeting, which is the 22nd of November. Obviously, at that meeting, we'll be looking in more detail at the budget.
At 7 p.m.
At 7
Don't
p.m.
forget it's 7 p.m.
At 7 p.m. Thank you all for your attendance. Thank you much.